Dr. Patrick is a medical doctor and a man of science, of medicine, of knowledge, and I've asked him to come tonight to present a message that I've heard him give, which is God, science, and the Bible. And this will set as a foundation part of what God has called us to do this fall, when we're going to see how great this God really is. So I want you to welcome tonight our good friend and fellow First Assemblyman, Dr. John Patrick. Come on.
Hi, how y'all doing? Well, I'm really excited to be here tonight to talk about God, science, and the Bible. But before we get started, I want to go over a couple things that Pastor Betzer told you about, and that is that I consider myself to be a man of science. Now, long before I became educated in science, I believed in God. On the surface, that may appear to be somewhat contradictory because it's the popular media that would have you believe that it is science which contradicts God and proves that there is no God. How many of y'all heard that before? Raise your hands for me. All right, I want you to look around the room tonight because I'm going to prove some very important things to you tonight that I hope will make you think. I'm here today to tell you that the more that I studied science, the deeper that my belief in God became. Now, I'm a Christian. I believe with every fiber in my body that Jesus Christ was born, that he lived, that he was crucified, and that he was resurrected, and it is through him that we come to the Father. That statement doesn't seem to be too earth-shaking or so strange because there are roughly 2 billion other self-professing Christians out there, right? But as strongly as I believe that statement to be true, I also believe that Satan is very real and exists. How many of y'all have known people who have no problem accepting the fact that God exists, but aren't really sure if Satan exists? Raise your hands for me. Why is that? We'll get back to that later, but first a little bit of science. May I have the first slide, please? Okay, this is a scientific law. It is a law that basically proves a observation in nature that is universally true. Now, why is it universally true? Because no matter where you test it in the universe, and you test it over and over again, it gives you the same results every single time. This is different from a scientific theory. See, a scientific theory will try and explain why something is, but a scientific law doesn't do that. A scientific law only says what is. Okay? Can anyone tell me what that law is? But before you answer, let me just caution you that it is not normal to know what that law is. In fact, if you are walking around with that knowledge, I do not believe you should be wandering around unrestrained in the general public. It is just not normal to know that stuff off of the top of your head. This is the universal law of gravity. Okay? Why is it universal? Maybe because no matter where you are in the universe, it's 100% accurate and 100% reproducible, no matter where you are. When you go skydiving, will this law apply? Yes or no? Sure it will. Okay, by the way, can you tell me what is the one piece of equipment that is absolutely essential for you to go skydiving? Wrong, it's not a parachute, it is a plane. You need a plane to go skydiving once, you need a parachute to go skydiving twice, right? Okay, that is the law. Y'all saw this up here, right? Here's my prop. That's the law, but here's your reality. Now, do you need to understand that law or believe in that law for gravity to exist, or does it exist no matter what you believe? See, here's the reality. You can choose to believe in gravity or choose not to believe in gravity, but at the end of the day, gravity exists anyway. It is what it is because it is. Now, I'm going to ask you to repeat that phrase back to me several times during the day, mainly because it's kind of fun when you get up here with a microphone, you get people to do what you tell them to do. So let's practice that. When I point to you, I'm going to say it is what it is because, and I want you all to say it is. All right, here we go. Gravity is gravity because it is what it is because it is. All right, y'all can do a little bit better than that. Let's try it one more time. Gravity is gravity because it's gravity. It is what it is because it That's important. I want you to do that with me as we go through the night. Okay, may I have the next slide, please? Matthew 22:37 says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Understand this. Your mind and your soul were created to work together in harmony. Okay? You cannot rejoice, your heart cannot rejoice in what your mind rejects. How many of y'all have children? Raise your hands for me. Okay, this is very important. I'm going to give you a sobering fact. Depending on the studies that you look at, between 75 to 92% of your children, by the time they graduate high school and graduate college, will either fall away from the church or doubt that God exists. Why is that? It's because, if you look again at studies, depending on which studies you look at, between 65 and 82% of all of the college professors either do not believe that God exists or doubt that God exists. They will use logic, science, and partial facts to make your kids have doubt in God. Does it make sense to you that if you have two contrary beliefs going on inside of your head, that you have a struggle going on inside yourself? You're at odds with yourself. And we all know that a house divided against itself will not stand. Okay. You see, y'all, if your kids don't know the answers to some very basic questions, they're going to fall prey to this trap. In college and in high school, kids struggle with logic. If it does not make sense, then it cannot be. Well, I already said that this is because even if they believed in their hearts that God exists, if you have a professor who has some authority, who plays with their minds, who convinces them that logically God makes no sense, they will have an internal struggle that ensues. And that is why they fall away from the church. Your heart cannot rejoice in what your mind rejects. The two cannot be in conflict. Does that make sense? All right, during my lifetime, I have observed three universal truths, okay? Or a universal truth. There are only three things in life that get you. I don't care what it is you're doing, there are only three things in life that get you. They are fear, hesitation, and doubt. Now, when you're younger, your life is much more geared towards the physical world than athletics. When I was a younger guy, I was very accomplished in the world of martial arts, okay? And I will tell you, in martial arts, there are three things that will get you. They are fear, hesitation, and doubt. If you're fighting an opponent, and he's a lot bigger and stronger than you are, and you are afraid of him, you have already lost the fight. If you are fighting, and you see an opportunity to hit the guy, but you hesitate, he can hit you first and knock you out, and you have lost the fight. If you doubt in your abilities before you step in the ring, you will lose the fight. In your professional careers, there are only three things that get you. They are fear, hesitation, and doubt. If an opportunity comes to you, but it costs money, and you are afraid to lose the money, you will not do the deal, and the opportunity goes by. If you see a good opportunity, but you can't make the decision and you hesitate, the opportunity can pass you by and the opportunity is lost. If you decide to take advantage of an opportunity, but you doubt that you will be successful, gee whiz, color me surprised. You fall flat on your face and the opportunity is lost. Worse still, once you have that first failure, the next time you attempt an opportunity, your chances for success are less than they were the first time, and that is because you already have a memory of failure. This is the cycle that happens in our lives when you rely on yourself instead of God. Does that make sense? All right. I already told you that Satan is very real and exists. Well, if it's God's desire to have an intimate relationship with us, does it make sense to you that Satan will use whatever weapons he can to prevent that relationship from happening? As I speak, I want you to think about your own lives and your past history, and I want you to recognize that these were the weapons. They are fear, they are hesitation, and they are doubt. Now, of the three, doubt is the strongest. Okay? The reason it's the strongest is because it allows a war to wage inside of your mind. A house divided against itself will not stand. Okay, this is why it's important to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. You must know what you believe and why you believe it, or you can fall victim to this trap. Now, in the early church, in helping the Jews to understand and, more importantly, believe that Christ was the Savior, the apostles used logic. Again, this is because you can only rejoice in your heart what your mind knows to be correct, what your mind knows to be true. May I have the next slide, please? Here are just a few passages from the book of Acts that prove to you what I'm saying. Okay, as was his custom, Paul went into the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the scriptures. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, day by day, with those who happened to be there. Every Sabbath he reasoned in the synagogue, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. They arrived in Ephesus, where Paul left Priscilla and Aquila, and he himself went into the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. What I am saying is true and reasonable. Okay, so having said this, let me try and reason with you. I already told you that I'm a man of science. Here is the basic problem with science. You see, the study of science, conventional science, is incorporated with the belief that God does not exist, that miracles cannot happen, and that the supernatural cannot be. Now, with those premises firmly in place, the scientist then begins what he claims to be an open and honest investigation of the facts. Do you see the problem? You see, this lie has been Satan's greatest success, because if you attempt to begin an investigation, you start out with the assumption that God does not exist, you will ultimately attempt to justify what you already believe. And the conclusion is that you will come to is that God does not exist. But if you want to be truly objective about this, you must start with the honest and open questions, which are: does God exist? Did Jesus exist? Then as a scientist, you have to look for proof that either proves or disproves the question. Does that make sense? All right, let's look at the average Christian. Now, how many times have you heard people say, well, I believe in God because I just do. I don't know why I believe, I just know it to be true. After all, that's what faith is, isn't it? I don't need to prove to you what I believe. I just know what I believe. I disagree with that strongly. And the reason I disagree with that is because faith is a form of conviction. And as such, it is therefore necessarily grounded in logic and right reason. See, Jesus never taught us blind faith. He taught us intelligent faith. May I have the next slide, please? 2 Timothy says, I know whom I have believed. John says, you shall know the truth, not ignore the truth. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Now, the reason why I say not ignore the truth is because if you're investigating science and you see the evidence which points to God, if your preconceived notion was that God doesn't exist, the only way that your life can continue as it was is if you ignore the facts, right? Okay? But if you're truly objective and you look at this, God wins every single time, because the truth is the truth because it's the truth. It is what it is because it is. I would therefore suggest this to you. It does not make sense that a God who created the entire universe would give us a faith that is irrational, and by that I mean without grounds and right reason. I believe in Christ because it is rational to believe in him. Now, I will also tell you that while I don't believe in artificial intelligence, I am constantly surrounded by examples of natural stupidity, okay? So let's step back and let's look at this for a minute really objectively. Let us reason together. Christianity is a factual faith. It appeals to history because the facts of history are easily recognizable and accessible to everyone. What if I told you that over 200 years ago, the main objection used by non-believers to Christians was, well, if the Bible was really true, we would have archaeologic evidence for the places mentioned in the Bible. In fact, what if I told you in the book of Luke alone, there are 32 countries and 54 cities that are mentioned? 200 years ago, we only had evidence for a couple of those, like Rome and Jerusalem. So, non-believers would point at that lack of evidence and say, see that? The Bible's just a story. It can't possibly be true, because otherwise you'd have examples for these ruins, and there's nothing there. It's just a nice story. I'm here to tell you that in the last 200 years, we now have discovered the archaeologic evidence that is no longer in debate, that proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that those 32 countries and 54 cities mentioned in the book of Luke existed. We found them all. But here's an important point I want you to think about. 200 years ago, were those cities still there and we just hadn't discovered it yet? Or had they been manufactured in the last 200 years? You see, just because you can't prove something doesn't mean it isn't true. A lot of times, all it means is that you haven't been able to prove it yet. But once the proof is there, the choice is yours. You can either accept it or ignore it. The choice is yours. In the last 200 years, we have found multiple references for Jesus Christ in Roman historical works, okay? Now, you have to understand this. The time we live in today is very different from the time of ancient Rome. Back then, there was no CNN, there were no cell phones, there were no emails. Every direction that came from government came from Rome. All right, now think about this logically for a minute. If you're the emperor of Rome and you want to get those directives out to your people, how do you do it? Well, you got to remember the empire is 1,000 miles wide, right? So what you would do is you would write down those orders, and you would write them down either on papyrus or clay tablets or animal skins, and you send them out. Now, because communication and travel wasn't very fast, do you think that there would be lots of those records exist? Because, I mean, it makes sense that if you want to get something out, you're not going to make one copy and send it from village to village to village, but you're going to make a whole bunch of copies and send them everywhere at once across an empire that stretches 1,000 miles. Does that make sense? All right. You need to understand this. Rome was all about records, okay? They recorded everything in multiple places. Now, the reason for this is that information and the flow of information was absolutely vital and critical to the existence of the empire. Without it, you had the potential for a revolt. If you had a revolt, you lost a source of taxes. Understand this. Every single province in the Roman world paid taxes. Anything that would have set that flow of money, those taxes, like natural disasters, like revolts, were immediately reported, sent back to Rome, cataloged, and dealt with. Now, the emperor dealt with them not because he was really interested in them from a human perspective, but because they could potentially crimp his cash flow. Does that make sense? All right. Everything was written down, recorded, kept cataloged, not only in Rome, but in all the provinces. Does that make sense to you? Wonderful. How many times have you heard people say that, well, we don't even really know if Jesus ever existed? If you ever heard that, raise your hands for me. Okay. From a logical point of view, again, just thinking about this, who would want to prove that Jesus existed? It'd be the Christians, right? I mean, without Christ, there is no Christianity. So the usual Christian claim that you will hear is, well, I know that Jesus existed because the Bible tells me so. While I agree with that, it's flawed logic when you're talking to a non-believer. And the reason is you can't use the Bible as a source when talking to a non-believer because they don't accept the validity of the Bible. If Christ really existed, there would be evidence for him outside of the Bible. Obviously, there are many references to Christ that come from the early Christian sources, okay? Eyewitnesses who are in the early church. But again, here's the problem. If you're trying to prove that Christ existed, a non-believer is going to dismiss this as a valid source because they're Christians. And also you have to think about this. If they're leaders of the early church and they're talking about Christ, what is their point? They want to see that the ministry is advanced. They want their beliefs to spread for the church to get bigger. Does that make sense? All right, well, what if there were other people who were outside of the Christian world that wrote about Jesus of Nazareth? Raise your hands for me if you've ever heard of a guy by the name of Josephus. Okay, a lot of people have. Josephus was a Roman, okay? He was also a Jew, and he wrote an exhaustive multi-volume story or book called The Antiquity of the Jews. He published that in 93 AD. Okay? Now understand this. Because of his position in the Roman government, he was stationed in Judea, right? He would have had access to every single communication that came from the government and went to Judea. He was stationed there, and so he would have seen every single edict, every single doctrine, including signed death warrants and issues for crucifixion. May I have the next slide, please? This is Josephus, and he specifically talks about Jesus and John the Baptist in 3 passages. The first one says, "But to some of the Jews, the destruction of Herod's army seemed to be divine vengeance, and certainly a just vengeance for his treatment of John, surnamed the Baptist." Second passage, "They convened the judges of the Sanhedrin and brought before them a man named James, the brother of Jesus, who was called the Christ, and certain others. He accused them of having transgressed the law and delivered them up to be stoned." May I have the next slide, please? Finally, he says, "About this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, for he was one who wrought surprising feats." What are surprising feats? Miracles. A man who wrought surprising feats and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Messiah. And that last passage of he won over many Jews and Greeks, I want you to pay attention to that because we're going to come back to that later. He was the Messiah. When Pilate, upon hearing him accused by men of the highest standing among us, meaning that he was God, he had him condemned to be crucified, and those who in the first place come to love him did not give up their affection for him. On the 3rd day he appeared to them, restored to life. What does that mean? Resurrected. For the prophets of God had prophesied these things and countless other marvelous things about him, and the tribe of Christians, so called after him, has still not to this day disappeared. Now, while Josephus was a Jew, he was not a Christian. He was born a few years after Jesus' crucifixion, and while it's not a logical argument, okay, somebody could say, well, you know, because Josephus wasn't really alive at the time that Jesus was, you can't really take what he's saying for true. The other thing that you could stretch and say is, well, he was a Jew, so maybe he wants to go ahead and have a kind of ulterior motive to promote Christ as Messiah. Okay, again, that's flawed logic. And let me just take a little aside here and prove to you why that is. Think about this. You know, how many of y'all know that Julius Caesar existed? Raise your hands. How many of y'all doubt his existence? Okay. How many of y'all know that George Washington existed? Raise your hands. How about Abraham Lincoln? How many of y'all know that Adolf Hitler existed? Raise your hands for me. All right, now watch this. How many of y'all were alive when Hitler was actually on Earth? Raise your hands for me. See, there are people in this room that even though I wasn't alive when Hitler was around, I could go to them and ask them, was he alive? Was he real? And the same thing with Josephus. But now, I want you to raise your hands for me if you've ever heard of a guy by the name of Thallus. Go ahead, Pastor Thomas. I know you're the only one in here who's heard of him. Why? Because he was there when Thallus was there, right? Now, listen. Thallus was a scientist. He was a Roman. He was an astronomer. He was a philosopher. And he was a historian. In 52 AD, that's 19 years after the crucifixion of Christ, in 52 AD, he wrote what is, in my opinion, probably the most exciting account of Jesus. Now, if you remember, when Christ was crucified, the Bible tells us that there was a period of darkness from the 6th to the 9th hour, or from noon to 3 o'clock our time, right? Okay, well, both the Bible and Thallus talk about there being giant earthquakes that occurred at this time within that period of darkness. Well, there are two things I want you to understand. First, if there were great earthquakes, could that devastation potentially cause a problem with cash flow back to Rome? Sure. Okay, well then, does it make sense to you that catastrophes such as that would have been recorded? Sure it does. May I have the next slide, please? This is a quote from Thallus. He says, "At the time of the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, there was a period of darkness from noon until 3, and I believe that we must consider this to have been an exceptional solar eclipse." Now, I want you to listen to what Thallus is arguing, okay? He is not arguing, did Jesus exist? He is not arguing whether or not Christ was crucified. And see, the other thing that happened, there was one of his contemporaries at the time, a guy by the name of Africanus. Africanus said, no, Thallus, you are wrong, because when Jesus of Nazareth was crucified, there was a full moon, and as such, it would have been impossible for there to have been a solar eclipse. Now, understand this. Thallus is a Roman who lives in Rome. He is not a Jew. He is not a Christian. Neither he nor Africanus are disputing the fact that Jesus existed. They are not disputing the crucifixion of Christ. What they are arguing about is this cause for a 3-hour period of darkness that occurred during Christ's crucifixion. Now, the first couple of times I read that, I was really excited because here's a non-Jew, non-Christian guys talking about Christ, who were alive when he was alive, who published it within 19 years of his crucifixion, and they could have been eyewitnesses. But after a while, I find myself asking myself, well, why are these guys arguing about whether or not there was a solar eclipse 19 years after the fact? It just didn't make any sense. Let's use our logic again. 2,000 years ago, did they have electricity? No. Okay, well, how many of y'all ever been camping before? Okay, lots of people. Well, when you go camping, invariably at some point at night, don't you find yourself looking up at the stars? Okay, well, what if you had to camp every single night because there was no electricity, there was no TV, and you were used to looking at the stars every single night? What if you knew back then that the planets had absolutely perfect patterns, that the moon and the stars had patterns in relation to the sun, and that those patterns did not change? Understand this. The earliest written down laws of planetary motion come from a guy by the name of Kepler, okay? They're complex mathematical equations. He did them in the 1600s, but clearly they existed before that because we have ancient calendars that exist today. We just don't have the calculations that went into them. Okay, we know that they exist because there are multiple old world sources for those calendars, and you have to understand, why is it important to them? Well, 2 reasons. First, they had to plant stuff. And if you're planting stuff and harvesting stuff, the cycles of the moon and the sun and the seasons are very important to you. But the second thing is, they believed that the gods, plural, gods, created the heavens and the earth. And if the gods were mad at the mortals, they would put signs in the heavens. Okay? And anything that happened out of the ordinary would be a sign from the gods that they were angry with us. Now, remember, they already knew that there was a precise order to the universe back in the time of Thallus. If everyone knew that solar eclipses happened, and they knew they occurred regularly, why are these guys still arguing about it 19 years later? Lunar eclipses were not new, okay? Solar eclipses were not new. On average, you have 2 to 5 lunar eclipses per year. You have 3 to 5 solar eclipses per year. So why 19 years after the fact are these guys still arguing about this one? Well, I did some astronomical checking, and I found this out. Roughly every 100 years, we will have an eclipse that lasts more than 7 minutes. The last time this happened was June 30th, 1973. It lasted for 7 minutes and 3 seconds. The next time we're going to have an eclipse lasting more than 7 minutes is going to be June 25th in the year 2150. Now, how do we know when it's going to occur? We know when it's going to occur because the movement of the sun and the planets is absolutely precise and predictable, okay? Now, you need to understand one other thing. The moon travels at over 1,700 kilometers or 1,000 miles per hour. And as such, it is physically impossible for there to be an eclipse that lasts longer than 7 minutes and 31 seconds. Now, in my life, I've seen a couple of eclipses, but it just always seemed to get cloudy for a couple of seconds. How many of y'all have seen that? Raise your hands for me, right? Okay, may I have the next slide, please? Now, this is an even more exciting slide. This comes from a guy by the name of Phlegon Trallianus. Phlegon was situated in Athens. So we got Thallus in Rome, we got Josephus in Judea, and now we have Phlegon in Athens. And he says, in the 4th year of the 202nd Olympiad, which was AD 32 to 33, the Olympics went over a 2-year period, a failure of the sun took place greater than any previously known, and night came on at the 6th hour of the day, which is noon, so that stars actually appeared in the sky, and a great earthquake took place in Bithynia, which is Turkey, and overthrew the greater part of Nicaea, which is a suburb of Athens. So this earthquake went over hundreds and hundreds of miles. Now, remember this. Phlegon states that this darkness is so profound that the stars and the night sky are clearly visible. Well, again, raise your hands for me if you've ever seen an eclipse where it was totally dark, pitch black. I haven't. I mean, I remember one where it got, like a little bit cloudy. But if these things are true, does it make sense to you that a 3-hour period of darkness would have absolutely terrified people in a point in time when they knew that this was a physical impossibility? Does it make sense to you that men of science would try to explain away such a phenomenon? Does it make sense to you that such a phenomenon was so incredibly out of the ordinary that they would still be talking about it 19 years later? Does it make sense to you that if you not only had this period of incredible darkness, but also these severe earthquakes, that you might be really, really scared? How could such a thing have happened? How many of y'all know that the Jews did not worship multiple gods, but rather just one God? You see, the issue for the Jews wasn't, does God exist? The issue for the Jews was, is Christ the Messiah, right? Okay, now do you understand that the Jews of the day would have known about astronomy? Okay? Just like everyone else, they would have recognized that this 3-hour period of darkness was a phenomenon that was so far out of the ordinary that it could only be explained by God. All right, think about this. Does it make sense then that the early church grew so quickly because in the book of Acts, the apostles used these unexplainable signs in the heavens, which could only have happened by the hand of God, and coupled them with scriptural prophecies from the Old Testament. Now remember, the New Testament wasn't in existence at that time, right? Because Jesus had just been crucified. So the people at the time would have reasoned, you know what? We were wrong. Christ was the Messiah. And you got to remember, these are the same people that would have heard him speak. These are the same people that would have seen firsthand the miracles that were done in his life. And these same people would have known and seen the resurrected Christ. Now, they would have seen the miracles they did because they were so far out of the ordinary. Because remember, even in the Bible, it tells that no matter where Jesus went, he was followed by multitudes. People at the time knew that only God could have caused such signs in the heavens. Okay? Well, that's great for them, but unfortunately for us, we can't actually point to the miracles that we saw Christ do. We can't point to the resurrected Christ. We can't point to the 3-hour period of darkness. So, what are we left with? Well, in the last 40 years, as scientists, we have known that our universe has a great deal of numbers. And those numbers do not change. They are precise. We know that the planet, the stars, and comets follow a fixed path, okay? But we can also measure a whole bunch of things, like the speed of light. We can measure electromagnetic constants. We can even measure the speed of subatomic particles that are 10 billionths of an inch big. Think of the universe as this giant machine, okay? And there's a bazillion dials on there, and each of those dials is set to one particular place on the machine. All of those dials have to be in exactly perfect position for life as we know it to exist. Noted scientist and physicist Stephen Hawking, in his book, A Brief History of Time, said that if you take those dials and you turn them just one little bit, life as we know it ceases to exist. Well, how much is that little bit? Have you ever thought about that? We've actually calculated, scientists have calculated how much is that variability, and it's 1 in 100,000 million millions. Now, I don't know what that is, but it's 1 followed by 97 zeros. And you see, the fine-tuning of the universe is what bugs the atheists. Because you are not talking anymore about what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? What you're left with the fact is that our understanding of science now points to intelligent creation. So for everyone now, the question is, not was there a Big Bang, but rather, who's the Big Banger? Okay? As Christians, We know who the Big Banger is. It says so in the very first verse of the first book. It says, in the beginning, who created? God created the heavens and the earth. Let us reason. If such precision is necessary for the universe to exist, then the knowledge of such a creator to create such a thing would have to be limitless. Let us further reason that if a being created everything that we know about, he must be bigger than everything he created. Do we agree? All right, well, let's talk about how big God is. May I have the next slide, please? This is a chapter from Isaiah, and it says, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, or with the breadth of his hand marked off the universe? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket, or weighed the mountains on scales and the hills in a balance? Who has understood the mind of the Lord, or instructed him as counselor? To whom then will you compare God? What image will you compare him to? Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls them each by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the heavens and the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. So if God tells us he's marked off the universe with the breadth of his hand, how big exactly is that? If he tells us that he knows the stars, names one by one, how many exactly is that? See, if we talk about knowledge increasing as we get closer to the end of times, then we should constantly be learning new things that we didn't know before. I already told you there was an astronomer in the 1600s by the name of Johannes Kepler who figured out the formulas of planetary movements, right? Okay, you see, for every movement of every planet and every star in our solar system, you can reduce that down to a finite, complex mathematical equation. So once again, the universe is precise, it is accurate, and it is reproducible. By that I mean we can calculate where any star or any planet will be at any point in time, past or present. This is because it does not change. It is constant, just like God is constant. He is always there. All you have to do is look for him. Seek and ye shall find. May I have the next slide, please? This is the Kepler Space Observatory, okay? In March 2009, we launched this. It has a planned mission lifetime of about 3.5 years, and its purpose is to discover other life-sustaining planets within our solar system. Well, at the beginning of 2009, before we launched this, we knew that there were roughly 700 other potentially life-sustaining planets out there. Since Kepler has been in orbit, that number has jumped to 2,326. Now, are these 1,600 new planets in these other worlds something that just suddenly came into existence? Or were they there all along and we just now have the understanding and ability to see them? Well, I told you that I'm a man of science. What do we know objectively about our universe? Before the Hubble telescope was launched into outer space, we thought that there were roughly 100 billion galaxies out there and that each of those had about 100 billion stars. Well, since Hubble has been launched, our understanding of the galaxy has been expanded. We now know that there are 300 billion other galaxies, some with more than 300 billion stars. Let's talk about distance. God says that he marks off the universe with the breadth of his hand. Well, we can't do that. So we measure distance by how far things are away from the Earth by what are called light years. Now, what is a light year? A light year is how far light travels in a year. Light moves at 700 million miles per hour, or roughly 1.68 billion miles every day. Now, to understand how big God is, you really need to understand how big a billion is. So let's put it in a couple of terms. If you and 590 of your friends worked every single day and saved every single paycheck, at the end of 1 year, you would not have $1 billion. You and 590 of your friends would have to work for 40 years just to have $1 billion. We can relate to $1 million, right? I mean, we all know houses that cost $1 million, but let's put that into time. And I want you to understand the difference between $1 million and $1 billion. We know there's 60 seconds in a minute, right? Okay, 1 million seconds ago was 11.5 days. But a billion, so from 1 million to 1 billion, 1 billion seconds ago, it was 1959. Okay? 1 billion minutes ago, Jesus was alive. How many of y'all been to the Sun Life Stadium over in Miami where the Dolphins play? All right? If you put a goldfish down at center field and followed it with 1 billion of his friends, you'd fill the Sun Life Stadium. The Sun Life Stadium holds 1 billion goldfish. Okay? Light travels, I already told you, 1.68 billion miles in one day. That means it's 5.88 trillion miles in 1 year. That's a light year. That's how we measure how far things are from the Earth. Now, I already told you that prior to Hubble, we estimated there were 100 billion galaxies, right? Okay. Now, our solar system, that is, everything from the Sun all the way out to Pluto, that's our solar system. Well, to give you an idea of scale, just so you can understand that, if we were to take our Earth and shrink it down to the size of a golf ball, you could fit 1 million Earths inside of the Sun. The Sun would be 15 feet in diameter if our Earth were the size of a golf ball. Okay? Now, we know that our solar system sits in the Milky Way galaxy, right? Well, the Milky Way galaxy is 100,000 light years wide. So how wide is that? That's 5.88 trillion miles times 100,000, or, to put it in another perspective, if you take our solar system, that is, all the planets, the Sun, all the way out to Pluto, and you shrink those down to the size of a quarter, how big that would be in relation to the Milky Way galaxy is you could take that quarter and stick it somewhere in North America. That means you could put a quarter in Canada, the United States, Mexico, and the Caribbean. May I have the next slide, please? This is the Hubble telescope. It was launched in 1990. It's about 360 miles above the orbit of the Earth. And because it doesn't have to look through all the smog and haze that they're giving us from India, right? It can see farther than we can here on Earth. Well, since its launch, remember I told you before it went up, we knew there were 100 billion galaxies. Since its launch, we now have found another 200 billion galaxies. Well, the question is, did all of these other galaxies just suddenly come into being like that? Or were they there all along and we just hadn't discovered them? One of the furthest galaxies that we know about is called the Whirlpool Galaxy. It's called the Whirlpool Galaxy because it looks like a giant whirlpool, okay? How far away is it from us? Well, it's 31 million light years away. That is 5.88 trillion miles times, in 1 year, times 31 million miles. All right, to put that in another perspective, let's just go ahead and think about that. In the same analogy we had earlier, where we got our solar system shrunk down to the size of a quarter, and we put in the Milky Way galaxy, and the Milky Way galaxy was then the size of North America. If you were to now take that Milky Way galaxy and shrink it down to the size of a quarter, you could put that quarter somewhere in the Earth. That's the relationship for how far we are away from the Milky Way galaxy. But again, who is to say that this is God? I mean, just as the people at the time of the crucifixion saw signs, maybe it would be really neat if we could see some sign, something that proved that God existed. I mean, after all, if such a God did exist, shouldn't there be some sort of concrete evidence out there existing somewhere, from something incredibly microscopic to something as far away as the Whirlpool Galaxy? From something as small as we can see, all the way to 31 million light years away. That's 31 million light years times 5.88 trillion miles in 1 year. Shouldn't there be just one thing that points to God? I mean, after all, if we accept the first statement of the first book as true, then God created the heavens and earth. Let us reason. If we accept that statement as true, then there are statements in the Bible that may be true. May I have the next slide, please? 2 Corinthians says that God cannot contradict himself. The next, Hebrews says God cannot utter anything false. Well, if God can't lie and won't contradict himself, in Deuteronomy he tells us, to the Lord your God belong the heavens, even the highest heavens, the earth, and everything in it. All right, so if everything, including us, belongs to God, shouldn't he have his name on his stuff? I know I put my name on my stuff. I use a Sharpie for regular things, and I like to engrave my name on my tools, so at least that way the person knows who they stole it from, right? Well, I put my name on them because it's important to me. Well, if this stuff is important to God, and if all the stuff in the universe is important to God, where is his name written on his stuff? I told you that since Hubble came into being, we can now see one of the farthest galaxies away, right? It's the Whirlpool Galaxy. It has 300 billion stars. Now remember, I told you that 1 billion minutes ago Jesus was alive. If you think about how many stars is 100 billion stars, it would, if you counted one star every single minute, it would take you 750,000 years to count the stars in the Whirlpool galaxy alone. Okay? Now, in the middle of the Whirlpool galaxy is one of the densest black holes that we know in science. Now, these things are called black holes because nothing, not even light, escapes from them. There's one such black hole within the Whirlpool galaxy, and it contains something called the X structure. I'm going to show you a picture that you can Google yourself, go to the Hubble website, and you will find it on their webpage in the picture galaxies, and this is called the X structure. May I have the next slide, please? Is that a coincidence? Or did maybe the God who created all things put his name on his stuff? You see, God knows it's his stuff. You can believe it or not. You can accept it or not. But at the end of the day, it is what it is because it is. This past October, on a Wednesday, I took my 13-year-old daughter, Genevieve, in to get her braces put on. And the first thing the orthodontist did is they take an x-ray to see where the starting position of the teeth is. And when that x-ray came up, my heart just sank because on the right side of her jaw, there was a tumor. And it was a nasty tumor. That was on a Wednesday. On Thursday, we got CAT scans that showed that the tumor was even bigger than we thought. And I sent those pictures off to a bunch of experts. I have access to them. I sent them off to 9 experts all across the United States, including 3 radiologists, and all of them came back with the same diagnosis, ameloblastoma. Now, that was on a Friday. On Monday, we had a biopsy scheduled, and what you need to know is an ameloblastoma is a very rare type of tumor. It's a very nasty tumor. It's a solid tumor, and there's no chemo or radiation that can cure it. The only chance that you have to cure an ameloblastoma is to cut it out and hope you got it all. But what that meant for Genevieve is we're going to have to cut off the right side of her face. We're going to have to cut off her jaw, her teeth, part of her tongue, all of the muscles here. Then we're going to have to cut out 2 ribs and put those up here to try and make a jawbone. We're going to have to cut into her hip, take bone out of her hip and try and pack it in her jaw and do that every 3 months for 3 years. And God willing, at the end of 3 years, we'd have a normal looking jaw. Not only were these surgeries going to be incredibly painful, but they were going to be horribly disfiguring. And, you know, that's what was killing me, because when you're 13 years old, a girl just wants to be pretty. How was I going to tell my baby girl what we had to do? My heart broke as I thought of just trying to see her every single day, looking in the mirror and watching her cry. You know, the first thing I did is I sent out prayer requests to everybody we knew, and I said, you know, this is such a rare tumor, please. I'm a man of science, right? So I was praying that we'd be brought somebody who would help us treat the problem, and that we'd be given the knowledge to know what to deal with it. But I also remember thinking, distinctly thinking at the same time, you know what, in all things praise God. So I remember thinking, well, you know what? Yes, she's going to have a horribly disfiguring operation, but she will be alive. I also praise God that it wasn't a more aggressive type of cancer. But you know what? As a father, I also prayed that if there was any way possible, please let this cut pass from her lips. I didn't want to see her suffer. This is my baby girl. If I could have changed places with her in a second, I would have done it like that. But I couldn't. For the first time in my life, I understood anguish. And on Friday night, we had the biopsy schedule on Monday. My wife was trying to comfort me, and she said she was sure Genevieve would be okay. And I just burst out crying because I told her I didn't have any peace about it. Saturday night, it came on my heart that I should be praying for healing. And then Sunday morning, my wife, Sherry, got up and she said, you know what? She said, why are we praying for people to come into Genevieve's life to help us treat her? If God wanted to heal her, he could just like that. So we began to pray for healing. We sent emails out to everybody. The next morning, I took Genevieve into the hospital, into the operating room. I put her to sleep. I was on one side of the table. The oral surgeon was on the other. We punched a hole in her jaw about that big to get a piece of tissue to send out to pathology to find out how big and nasty the tumor was. And when we punched that hole in her jaw, both of us literally stopped. We leaned to the right. We leaned to the left. And the surgeon said to me, I don't know what to say. This doesn't make sense. The solid tumor that was there on Friday was gone on Monday. There was nothing there in her jaw. Praise God. Y'all, There was nothing in her jaw but a hole where this tumor had been. And I said, you know what? I know how this happened. Praise God. I started praising God for the miracle. Afterward, I went into the recovery room and I was crying because it was just, praise God. And I told Genevieve how sick she had been. And I told her, I said, you know, Genevieve, there are lots of people out there that wonder if God exists, but you know that God exists because of this miracle. I also told her, I said, Genevieve, there are so many people out there that know that God exists, but wonder if God knows that they exist. And I told Genevieve, no matter what 7 billion other people in this world think, you know that God has worked in your life and that God knows your name. I remember when my niece was 24 years old, she was practicing the Lord's Prayer and she said, Our Father who art in heaven, how did you know my name? Let us reason. Does it make sense to you that if we know that there are over 300 billion galaxies, each of whom has over 300 billion stars in each of them, that it might not just be that big of a deal for God to remember the names of 7 billion people on this earth? Does it also make sense that if God created us, that we are His? Does that make sense? This is a fact. The entire living world is divided into 2 kingdoms, the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom. Everything that is alive will fall into one of those 2 categories. All right, well, if God created everything, where is His label? What if I told you that there is a structure in every single living plant on this earth that is responsible for support, for strength, and nutrition? It's called phloem. May I have the next slide, please? That is phloem magnified 400 times. Is that a coincidence? Or did God put His label on every planet on this earth? The Bible tells us as we get close to the end of times that our knowledge will increase. Okay? That structure, phloem, was not known until the 1800s when the microscope was invented. But what about now? The electron microscope, which is a much more powerful microscope, was invented in 1931. It lets us see things that are incredibly tiny. And in 1979, God once again made His presence known to man. What if I told you that each one of us has a ownership label inside of us that is absolutely microscopic? We already talked about how big billions are. Well, let's talk about a billionth, okay? It's called a nanometer, and you've heard of atoms. Well, atoms are incredibly tiny. It takes 3 to 10 atoms to make 1 nanometer. That's how small a nanometer is. But again, let's put that in perspective we can all relate to. Let's say that you wrote your name down on a Post-it, on a sticky pad, okay? And you wrote your name down, and you were standing here in Fort Myers. Somebody would need to keep backing up with that Post-it pad until they got to Russia. That's how small a billionth is. May I have the next slide, please? Colossians 1:16 and 17 says, For by Him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. All things were created by Him and for Him. He is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. Okay, for 7 billion people on this earth, there's a protein that exists in every single person. Every single person. It's only 2 nanometers wide. That's 6 to 20 atoms wide, right? And it's a protein whose sole function is literally to hold cells together. This protein just keeps us from going to pieces. It's called laminin. May I have the next slide, please? That is laminin. Someone once said, an atheist can't find God for the same reason a thief can't find a policeman. The science is there. It is undisputed. The question is not where is God, but rather where is God not? God exists, whether you choose to believe it or not. It is what it is because it is. God has placed His mark on each one of us, and all we have to do is choose God. Now, at the beginning of the day, I made 2 statements, right? First, that I believed in God, and second, that I believed in Satan. Satan seeks to enslave you, okay? Here are just a few of the ways. Are you a slave to your past? Maybe you were abused as a kid. Maybe you're a slave to guilt. Maybe you've done some bad things in your life. Maybe people have done some bad things to you. Maybe you have hurtful memories. Maybe Satan has made you a slave to food or to alcohol or to drugs. You have to understand the only way that Satan can succeed is if he convinces you that you are not good enough to go to God. He will use fear, hesitation, and doubt. Those are the lies, but here's the truth. God has his mark on every single one of you, even at the most microscopic level. You are his. All you have to do is ask. John 14:6 says, Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I don't care how bad you think you are. I don't care how big you think your problems are. I don't care how much trouble you think you are in. Let us reason. Is it possible that a God who has put his mark on everything, from just a few atoms wide to one of the farthest places we can see that is trillions and trillions and trillions of miles away, might just be a little bit bigger than whatever you are facing? Trust in the Lord your God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Because at the end of the day, whether you believe it or not, it is what it is because it is. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we come to you through your Son, Jesus Christ, to thank you for giving us these revelations, Lord, for letting us know that each of us belongs to you. And Lord, there are people that are watching, there are people here that are struggling with problems. You know what their problems are. Please give them the comfort, the understanding, and the knowledge to know that they know that they know that they are yours. All they have to do is ask. Please send us the Holy Spirit to strengthen us and give us resolve so that when we're tested and tried, that we won't turn away, that we remain true, we remain faithful, and in all things that we know that everything here, including us, belongs to you. Father, we would just ask that you use us in whatever way you see fit to further your kingdom here on this earth. And we praise God.